All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon. We'll get started here. This afternoon, our session is going to be talking about the reading rope that was created by Hollis Scarborough. But it, um, this training actually was initiated from me by Nancy Hennessy. Back in June, the Literacy Symposium was hosted by our friends at Patton, and Nancy Hennessy is a researcher in the field that is a big name in reading research, and she did a training for the Literacy Symposium that I attended back in June. And at the end of this presentation today, you'll be able to get a link to her presentation, and I was able to take some of the things that she talked about this summer and turn them around for all of you in our IU to be able to use them in your classrooms and in your practice. So most of my content today does come from Nancy's presentation, which again, at the end of my presentation, I'll give you a link to her video. So if you have the chance to watch her original video, you'll be able to do that as well. We are recording this morning's session so that educators that have students in front of them right now and aren't able to attend with us at this time can go ahead and watch this at a later date. And please feel free to share that with anyone that you have in your buildings as well. So it'll be on our online learning hub at the Blast IU 17's website. So let's take a look at Scarborough's reading rope. Many of you are probably familiar with this reading rope because it has been around in the research for a long time. But today I want us to take that reading rope and tease it out and talk about each strand and the research behind the strands and why they are all into this reading rope. Because what we're going to find out through Nancy Hennessy's work is that when Hollis Scarborough created this reading rope, she acknowledged that all of these strands do stand by themselves independently. However, for us to be creating these skilled readers or students that are fluent readers, we really need to interweave all of these strands to make that successful reader. So we'll talk this afternoon about the reading rope. Again, it was created by Hollis Scarborough, and this reading rope was initially created for parents and teachers, for her to be able to explain how we get to that outcome of skilled reading. So again, it was a metaphor that Hollis Scarborough created when talking with parents and explaining to teachers how to get to the end result of a skilled reader. Although Hollis has a lot of research and took a lot of time to create this reading rope, she also took the time to look at 61 different studies outside of her own research. And in those 61 studies, she created a meta-analysis in 2018. And that meta-analysis of those 61 studies really created a list of predictors that give us what are students coming to us with at the beginning of school age in kindergarten, and what is the highest correlation with what they're coming to us with or without to a predictor of the ability to read or the disability to read. So you can see the list of predictors there on the left from her meta-analysis study, and notice that a lot of those predictors actually overlap into what we see Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. So for example, letter identification and concepts of print really are the top predictors, according to Hollis's meta-analysis, of what a predictor would be for our students to be able to be successful readers. So if you notice the correlation between that meta-analysis and Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, the letter identification correlates with our phonological awareness, which we'll dive into a little bit more. And concepts of print really attaches more to that top layer of the rope with the literacy knowledge and the print knowledge. And you can see vocabulary and recall is also at the top of that list of early predictors for reading and writing success. Also, Hollis Scarborough in 2001 came out with a book, and she, in the book, in the one chapter, came up with this connection to informed practice. She talks about the screeners that a lot of us are using in our classrooms, especially this time of year. In the fall, we usually use those screeners to predict what strategies our students are very skilled in, and also where we have to inform our practice and what's driving our instruction. So Hollis acknowledged these screeners, and she quoted the risk factors that have been identified by correlational research on preschoolers and kindergartners provide the best guidelines for screening batteries to identify young children most likely to develop reading disabilities. And so through our early identification with our screeners, as well as our progress monitoring, we're able to, as instructors then, talk about what are the parts of the reading rope that our students really need more instruction on. And those screeners then again take place normally in the winter as well as the spring. So we can talk about if those interventions in the classroom are being successful. In addition to Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, we have another researcher named Natalie Gabb in 2016. She created her own list of key predictors of reading ability. And I thought this was important to point out because a lot of them are similar and we see as well on Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. For example, phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, being able to have that letter naming knowledge and being able to have that print understanding. And you can see a lot of these are similar to what we see on our screeners that we're using, whether it's Ames Web or you're using Acadiance Reading or Dibble's Next. A lot of these are the same predictors that we're screening in our universal screeners. So let's talk about the strands of the reading rope. And Nancy Hennessy uses pipe cleaners to model this. And I've also seen Dr. Pan Kastner at Patton also use a really large rope with big, huge pieces of fabric. But this afternoon, I just have some wiki sticks. And if you're fortunate to work with teachers and you're going to replicate this for them, I highly encourage you to put in the hands, whether it's pipe cleaners or wiki sticks or something that they can replicate this reading rope, because it's really important for them to continually come back to this when they're thinking about their instruction. I have it at my desk and I constantly am looking at it when I'm thinking about trainings that I'm doing for teachers. So we're gonna start with the bottom of the reading rope, specifically the word recognition strands at the bottom. And Hollis Scarborough first starts, I'm gonna start at the bottom of these quotes. She first starts with phonological awareness. And speaking on that, she speaks of the broad class of skills that involve attending to, thinking about, and intentionally manipulating phonological aspects of spoken language. So when we're talking about phonological awareness, we're just speaking of phonemes, the sounds that students are hearing. Syllables, can they break apart those sounds? Can they manipulate those sounds? Are they able to delete sounds? Are they able to substitute those sounds? So all of those skills, all of those concepts come in that one strand of Hollis's rope under phonological awareness. The middle quote there is talking more about the decoding skills, speaking specifically of process of applying one's knowledge of the correspondence between graphemes and phonemes to determine the pronunciation and hence the identity of the word represented by a particular letter sequence. So we take that second strand of the bottom part of our rope and we're talking about decoding. This is the alphabetic principle. This is when we're talking about that letter sound correspondence, when we're doing our phonics instruction with our students, making sure that they understand that we only have 26 alphabet letters, but of those 26 alphabet letters, we're creating the phonemes of our language, which is an additional, up to 44 different phonemes. So we're now taking both of those and we're weaving those together. Not only can they identify the sounds, but now can they associate that printed word along with the sounds that they hear. And then that top statement, talking specifically about still decoding, but also having that sight recognition of familiar words. And she speaks of it as a broader term that refers to the process of determining a written word's identity by any means, not just by using one's knowledge of orthographic regularities. So can our students now have their first strand of our phonological awareness and the understanding of sounds? Can they have the second strand, of the phonics and the correspondence between those sounds and the graphemes that represent those sounds? And then finally, taking that and putting it into our sight recognition, where we now can automatically recognize those patterns that we're seeing in our language with our phonics. So at the bottom of this rope, Hollis Scarborough talks about the significance of weaving those three different skills together and making them strategically automatic so that we can continually get into tougher and more complex text so that our students can then get to the top ends of the rope. So that is why you can see The metaphor is braided towards the bottom there, where we're getting strategically automatic with our phoneme recognition, with our decoding using decodable text, with our knowledge of the patterns in our spelling. So ultimately weaving those together. So when we think about our instruction in the classroom, then what does that look like? What does that sound like when we go into our instruction with students? How can we get them to become increasingly automatic with those skills? So thinking about weaving those three together, saying things like, read this word in this sentence, or sound out this word, or how do you spell this sound? Asking questions like, what is the sound for this or these letters? Or just simply asking, what is the name of this letter? All of those questions there on the left, how many syllables are in this word? Explicitly teaching that in our classroom is going to allow us to weave those skills together with our students. Getting the phonological awareness, the decoding, and that sight recognition to become increasingly automatic. One way I find very important to make sure that our teachers in the classroom are paying attention to the scope and sequence of the programs that they're using that are helping them do this weaving process, right? Making sure that they know that staircase of skilled reading. Where do we start in our pre-K students, and where should we be K to 1, 1 to 2, and then continually working with that advanced phonemic awareness in second, third grade, not just stopping because we're getting to that first or second grade where we don't know that we need to include that in our instruction. It's very important to have that explicit, systematic, teacher-directed instruction that continues through K through third. We're doing the advanced word study, and we're really focusing on phonics and alphabetic knowledge and still continuing that advanced phonemic awareness. One way we can ask ourselves if our students are learning these skills is by asking ourselves questions like, are your students recognizing and manipulating segments of sound and speech? Do they have that letter-sound relationships? Can they blend their letters and sounds together to make those spelling patterns? And there's more that goes in there. So there's all sorts of connections that work together to inform our instruction. In the training with Nancy Hennessy, she's heard saying a few times, and I quoted her on here, frayed strands do not a rope make. And she really talked about how weakness in any of these strands can disrupt reading. And then weakness in several strands can disrupt reading even more. And that's a quote taken by Hollis Scarborough's book. So we really need to remember that if we have part of this rope that is frayed, that's where we need to intervene as instructors and make sure that we're giving our students that tiered support, that we're helping to fill in those gaps and help them get that rope not frayed anymore to continue to braid the rope instead. I thought there was a great quote also that I took from Nancy Hennessy's training over the summer. She was quoting Hollis Scarborough, and she was talking about how the importance of these strands being interdependent of each other and how we can teach them in isolation. However, we need to really make sure that we're also teaching that they are interdependent. And the quote came there on the left of my screen. It is customary to consider separately the strands involved in recognizing individual printed words from those involved in comprehending the meaning of the string of words that have been identified, even though those two processes operate and develop interactively rather than independently. So remembering that we might teach just phonological awareness with our Haggerty program, but we're also making sure that when we're modeling good reading, we're showing our students how we're weaving those skills together. I know that was quick, but now we'll take a look at the other part of the reading rope that Hollis Scarborough explained, and that's in her language comprehension section. So the bottom of the rope there, we just talked about with the wiki sticks representing our phonological awareness, our sight recognition, and our decoding. And we talked about how we have to become increasingly automatic with those things. And in addition to our language comprehension now, we'll take a little bit deeper dive into that. So when we think about the language comprehension pieces of the reading rope, I'm going to first talk about these orange circles, talking about vocabulary starting at the bottom with breadth and depth and precision of knowledge of word meanings. Our students need to be able to have a surface level understanding of a word, have the text-based understanding of what the author is meaning by that word and why they used it, and then be able to create that mental model of what that word looks like and be able to put it into their vocabulary, into their lexicon, so that they can pull at it another time. Also, the language comprehension strands of the rope talk about using rules of syntax and semantics. And this is really where we're talking about the language structures of the rope. And how can we make sure that our students understand the semantics and the syntax to convey the meaning of the text. That third circle there talks about organization of print to convey meaning in specific ways that support reading and writing. And this is really where our readers have to understand that verbal reasoning and what the author intended us to understand by reading the words that they wrote. At the top of these circles, you can see the next orange one is really talking about identification of meaningful relations between the various parts of text and between those parts of the reader's background knowledge. And that final circle also talks about background knowledge, where we're a storehouse of facts and concepts and experiences. There's a great video out there, Teaching Content is Teaching Reading. And we really need to remember when we're talking about this part of the reading rope, that our science and social studies time and our schedule really can be used to help with language comprehension, where we're building that background knowledge for our students and exposing them to new vocabulary and new language that they might not be familiar with. So talking specifically about comprehension, we talked what early predictors of reading difficulty was for the other strands of the rope. When we talk about this strand, these strands of the rope, early identification predictors of comprehension difficulties are expressive vocabulary, grammar, as well as narration. And that came from Katz in 2016. And you can think about the way that we're doing things in the classroom in 2020, we're still talking about our universal screeners, checking for letter identification. We're checking for concepts of print. We're asking them to do a retell with our story recall. And of course, phonological awareness is still in there as well. The bottom quote I found very interesting. Results showed that measures of language ability in kindergarten significantly added to the prediction of reading comprehension difficulties over and above kindergarten word reading predictors and direct measures of word reading in second grade. So as our students are moving through the grades, we have to continually direct our explicit instruction to this reading rope. We have to continually go back and ask ourselves, where are the gaps in the student's understanding? Use those universal screeners that you're using at the beginning of the school year to get that information. Don't be afraid to dig deeper and analyze your universal screeners, not just with your composite score, but dig deeper into those subset categories so that you know where the gaps are with your students' understanding. The Scarborough quote from 2001 there simply is stating that, again, like we talked about the top of the rope, we still need to take all of the pieces of the bottom of our rope and still have them interwoven together. So even if the pronunciations of all the letter strings in a passage are correctly decoded, if we have this becoming increasingly automatic, the text still will not be comprehended if they don't know the words in their spoken form, if they cannot parse the syntactic and semantic relationships among the words, or if the student lacks that critical background knowledge or the inferential skills to interpret, or what Scarborough calls read between the lines. So again, Scarborough uses that metaphor of her reading rope to talk about how can we take the background knowledge, how can we take the vocabulary knowledge, how can we take the knowledge of language structures and the semantics and syntax, our verbal reasoning, as well as that final piece of the rope, our literacy knowledge, and how can we take all of those pieces and start weaving them together and start turning those so that we're getting all of those to be woven together. And this was other connections to skilled reading quotes that I pulled for you. So if you think about, like I said, when we're talking about vocabulary, making sure our students have the word level understanding, that they can decode those individual words and access meaning of the words that they're hearing or reading. And then can they go to the sentence level where they're getting more of the understanding of the structure and the sense of the sentence and derive meanings of the individual words. And then finally, what we ultimately want them to do is construct this mental model of the text where they can integrate all of that information from different sentences and their background knowledge and incorporate everything all together, retrieve it from their long-term memory, and create that reading comprehension. So in our classroom, how do we do this? What can we be doing and saying to our students to make them weave it all together, to allow for that to become increasingly strategic, that we're using all of these skills at the same time? So if you're Nancy Hennessy's training, she talks about using the fable, the ant and the grasshopper. And she uses that as an example. And you could weave all of these things together by asking your students questions like, why is this a fable? What do you know about ants and their habits? And pull on their background knowledge prior to reading. After reading, ask questions like, does this paragraph make sense to you? And allow for that verbal reasoning to come in. Don't be afraid to stop and ask students questions like, what does this word or phrase mean? Why did the author put that into this passage? Or who or what is this sentence about? Because we know our language structure can be so skilled in different ways that those sentences can get very confusing to our readers. So explicit instruction, again, going back to that explicit instruction, making sure that we're using good teaching to teach all pieces of this reading rope, and then asking our students to constantly be weaving it together. And that will allow them to become increasingly strategic when they're doing that as good readers. Again, going back to Nancy Hennessy, she said that quote, "Frayed strands do not a rope make." So again, all of these strands, if we're missing one of them, we have to go back as educators and find what are the gaps that our students have. Because weakness in any strand can disrupt reading, but weakness in several strands can disrupt that reading even more. So it becomes a tough job of us to go back and find which strand of that rope is frayed, and how are we going to give them interventions and multi-tiered systems of support? How are we going to give them those supports to make sure that they can get those strands woven together again? So ultimately, what is the message that Nancy Hennessy was trying to convey in the Literacy Symposium in June? Is that we have to teach all the strands. We have to teach all the strands together to get to that end point of skilled reading. So if you look at my wiki stick rope in connection to what the rope is that Hollis Scarborough has there, at the bottom, we're taking that phonological awareness and our sight recognition and our decoding, and we're weaving them together to become increasingly automatic. And she's saying in her research that over time, by students doing that, in addition to enhancing background knowledge, developing more vocabulary, understanding like language structures and verbal reasoning, and really getting a good handle on literacy knowledge, increasingly strategically weaving all of those together, that ultimately we will become skilled readers and fluent readers at the end by putting all of those together into our rope. So Nancy Hennessy's message was portrayed loud and clear that we really need to be teaching all of the strands to get that end destination of a skilled reader. So I know that was quick, and I know that these are meant to be quick modules for all of you to get on your lunch break, and I appreciate you coming. I'm going to stop the video now so that I can open it up for questions from all of you, or also give you